Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dissecting Diddy, our weekly podcast where we wrap up the week's events in the Sean Diddy Combs racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking trial. The prosecution bringing their case, the presentation of their case to the jury to the close. And we are now in the home stretch of this trial. And I am once again honored to be joined by my co-host, Nicole Johnson, and our esteemed legal analyst, Yohayra Azcona, our legal eagle, who joined us on our first episode and who is back to lend her expertise and her observations to what's happening in the latest with this very high stakes trial. And all jokes aside, this is a jury that is going to be contemplating the fate of Sean Diddy Combs, who could spend the rest of his life in prison if he's convicted. And so, Nicole, I want to open it up to you. Your thoughts on what we've been seeing happening over the last several days as the prosecution wraps up its case.
Well, we've seen a lot, so many twists and turns. We've heard testimony, explosive testimony at times from witnesses, people close to Sean Combs. The Cassie Ventura testimony just really opened up this case. We've been listening for racketeering charges because he is charged with racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking. And before we started, Yohayra and I were talking about, are we seeing this racketeering case? Are we seeing any evidence of racketeering so far? It's been an explosive week. We lost track. Is this week 7?
I believe so.
Jay, you're
this
muted.
Trial was supposed to end next week,
but we had a delay with a juror being sick. How will this affect the case?
And a juror dismissed.
Yes.
And a juror dismissed.
There are a few aspects. Let's definitely start with the juror because that is a very important element. So juror 6 was removed because it was found that he was providing inconsistencies about where he lives. And you have to be living within the federal district in order to serve on the jury. That is a legal requirement. It is a basic necessity. And again, here, that juror was inconsistent about where he was living and was removed. And I think that that was important and is detrimental because this juror was a Black man in his 40s. And I feel that the defense really wanted that juror on the jury because it was going to benefit their side, and it was going to be someone who probably understood Mr. Combs and his experices a little
that
bit
is a strong assumption, but the one that the defense had to make.
But I think that given the lack of diversity on the jury, I think that it was one of the few things that they have or had going for themselves. And attorneys, especially during the trial, we really create our spectacle or our story based on the dynamics that we perceive, as Jay just noted, of the jury. And they remove this juror and they replace him with a man who I believe is 57 years old, from Westchester County. And the age alone, while I do not know the race of the man, the age alone would concern me because, as I've mentioned time and time again, I think that these experiences and these realities are so far removed from an average person's existence and understanding and morals that I think that that age gap might make it even more difficult for them to understand or even consider that someone would consensually engage in these acts and in these very disturbing sexual activities. And then this juror that's sick definitely delays. And I think that that's important because for attorneys, we like to keep our momentum. We practice in the morning. We know what we want to say. We're walking into the courtroom with our energy and our vibe kind of set a certain way. And when you throw us off, it's very impactful to our ability to adjust and our ability to convey the message.
But I want to talk a little bit. Let's stay on this juror, the one who apparently didn't live where he said he lived. There's a questionnaire. The process of selecting a jury is a very extensive process. We're in federal court. This is a major trial, major celebrity on trial here. How did this juror fall through the cracks with his discrepancy in his address? How did they find out? Did they follow him? How do they know that his address is not the address that was listed when he initially did his questionnaire?
For starters, I think generally it was just a huge oversight. From what my understanding is, he resides or has some sort of address in New Jersey, but his fiance is living in New York. And unfortunately, people don't update their driver's license. They don't update their mailing address. They don't keep it consistent. And at that point, you really take the representation of the individual. I'm not sure if maybe he said something to someone else or maybe another jury member.
It was his own statements about splitting time between New Jersey and New York and the inconsistencies about how much time he spent in New York.
Exactly. And again, the realities of where someone is residing versus their registered addresses, those discrepancies happen. And I think that he wasn't as forthcoming as he should have been. And when they questioned him about it, he couldn't keep the story straight.
And, at the end of the day, it's not like they're bringing in someone who is unfamiliar with everything that's been happening. The alternates are sitting there in the courtroom the entire time. But Yohayra, to your point, I mean, this is someone who is drastically different in their background, who's going to be now one of the primary, jurors that's going to be contemplating, Combs's fate. And jury instructions are going to be so important in this case. So important. That racketeering conspiracy charge looming large over everything. Can you just talk to us give us an inside perspective as an attorney on preparing for closing statements as we head towards the home stretch of this trial?
I think that closing statements the importance of it cannot be overstated. It's really your last chance to address all of the inconsistencies. It's really your last opportunity to bring the case home, as they say. And I think that in this case specifically, there was an outstanding amount of inconsistencies. I'm not sure that the prosecution was able to prove that there wasn't consent, and I think that the defense is really going to have to drive this home and to really, again, bring out every single inconsistency. And I think that the prosecutor is really going to have to focus on identifying where consent turned into coercion. And it's not like you have days to do this. You only have a few minutes. So my thing is, be brief, be bold, be gone. Say what you need to say, make it impactful, make it clear, make it direct, and don't go on and on and on. Sometimes I think that lawyers go on about facts and about details that don't matter because they're not going to really lead towards the conviction or not. Yes, they might be important, but they're not the ones you want to focus on. But I think that the defense has been great in presenting the information in that way. So as closing statements come up, it's going to be very interesting to see what attorney consider, or what each side considers to be their main points and the points that they either have to rebut, defend, or reiterate.
So I just received the latest mid-morning note from our team that's in the courthouse. I'm off today, which is why I'm dressed like this and I'm at home. But I still get all the notes and obviously still like reading in.
It's not a
What'd you say, Nicole?
That's a polo shirt right there. You always dress like that.
But check this out. Here's the note that the summary of what came out this morning. The judge asked the prosecution, Yohayra, to your point, to simplify the RICO charges. He mentions something in the charges regarding, quote, conspiracy to commit conspiracy, and made a joke that if he had to be compared to an emoji, it would be the mind blown. And then everyone in the courtroom laughed. And so the court is going to provide the defense and the prosecution with the proposed jury charge today. Those are the guidelines by the judge to the jury prior to deliberations. The importance of the jury charge is going to be
absolutely
everyone is going to be paying attention to that.
It's something
Combs's defense asked judge, if he could, quote, use his magic to allow them to use his courtroom to show Combs various videos to take advantage of the fact that the court is ending early today. Today's going to be an early day. So, the next big stage of this case before we get to the jury charge is going to be the defense putting on its case.
Yeah.
The defense a few days ago estimated that it would take anywhere from, I think, 2 to 5 days to put on its case. And obviously, we know that's just a rough schedule, right? Because, anything can happen, whether it's an issue with the juror or whether, a cross-examination takes longer than expected. But we are most definitely rounding the corner, home stretch, towards the end of this trial.
And, folks are wondering, and I guess it's been said that Sean Combs will not take the stand.
Right.
He doesn't have to. As a defendant, does that matter? Do you believe he should? We've heard his voice in court with the tapes. He's been in court attentive throughout the whole thing. What do you think as a defense attorney? Would you have advised him to take that stand?
Generally, we never have defendants take the stand. And I know that in the gun charges that Diddy faced many years ago, he did take the stand and he was very charismatic, and it was found that him testifying was beneficial to his case. But here, absolutely, I would not have them take the stand. I think that, again, how can you explain these actions? How can you make it so that someone relates, so that someone understands? And I think that he's also in a different place now than he was in the 90s. He's larger than life. He's this charismatic, this global mogul superstar. I think that he's playing it right by playing it safe. Wear your sweaters, wear your khakis, smile, don't say too much. And I'm also a super big concern of mine, if I was his attorney, is bring him on the stand and his testimony. What other things could that open the door to? There is tons of evidence that isn't admissible unless someone opens the door, and someone can open the door to additional testimony through what they're saying, through what's the responses, through what's being asked. So I think that the defense is very careful in what they will and will not allow him to do. And I think that that's smart. It's something I would have done. And at the end of the day, let's not forget, it is the state or the federal prosecutor's burden to prove this beyond the reasonable doubt. They're the ones that need to prove this. They're the ones that need to bring it home. It is not the defense's job to address every single allegation through the defendant's testimony. It is their job to rebut and create reasonable doubt as it pertains to the evidence being presented.
And with that, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Dissecting Diddy, our weekly podcast. We're going to keep the conversation going with my co-host, Nicole Johnson, and our legal analyst, Yohayra Azcona. Nicole, we heard audio, bits and pieces, inadvertently, of sex videos that were played to the jury. The video feed was not shown to the gallery in the courtroom. It was not shown to the overflow room. But, this was the first time that we got to see jurors react, reading body language to see how they were reacting to all of this. I know this has been a long trial, and we've heard about a lot of these descriptions of freak-offs. But in your opinion, how heavily impactful are these videos going to be to the jury?
Well, I think just from what you said, Jay, the reaction, seeing their faces as they're listening and watching the video, I think, could they relate to what we've been hearing and seeing, and the evidence has been the evidence that's been presented of these freak-offs in these hotel stays? I don't think the jury can connect with what they're watching on the tapes. And I guess it's a concern, from the defense side or the prosecution side. I don't see a connection there. I see shock. I see, oh my goodness, folks watching.
The prosecution is hoping that the jurors are clutching their pearls and are appalled. And the defense team is hoping that these jurors are like, so what?
Yeah. Well, I don't see clutching pearls, and I don't see so what. I see draws dropping.
We need to be. You wish you could be a fly
I
in the
could
deliberation
listen.
room,
That
right?
must be
Fly
insane.
on the
And I
wall,
think
just seeing how everything goes
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
Johaira, we got into the weeds this week, and we say in the weeds, it's just a term that we use in terms of like this case getting really technical. And there's always a point in a trial where you get away from the glitzy and the sexy stuff to, okay, let's get down to the nitty gritty of trying to prove these charges. And we saw the prosecution really trying to draw a correlation between the business dealings and it being an alleged criminal enterprise, which feeds into that RICO charge. Do you think that the prosecution was effective in getting into the numbers and establishing who was told to do what on official time, etc.?
not enough. And that's me being honest. I think that let's save the best for last has been the Fed's approach with the videos. And I think that it was strategic and intelligent of them to make sure that they presented that evidence right before the defense was supposed to put on their case. Just because to me, it's a nod of, hey, before you hear all of this other information, I want you to see what it is that we've been talking about. I want you to see what it is that these victims have experienced. But as it pertains to the RICO charge, I do think that there's some absolute damning evidence, such as the fact that some of the assistants testified that they made certain purchases on the company credit cards, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't consistent enough, in my opinion, to say that all of the orchestration was only for the freak offs and that it was being done in that Bad Boy Entertainment, and the purpose of that enterprise is for these freak offs. I don't think that it was consistent enough. I think the defense can even show that Sean Diddy Combs doesn't handle enough of his finances to know exactly how every single thing is paid for. But the charge that really does concern me is a transportation charge. I think that there, no matter what happens, there is going to be some sort of culpability on his behalf, because the requirements there are whether there was, some sort of knowingly and some sort of commercialization of sexual services. And here,
I mean, that charge is an evolution of the Mann Act,
Yes, it
which
is.
was intentionally created. And I've said this before a couple of times. Is intentionally created 100 years ago to make sure that they could put Jack Johnson in prison,
Yes.
the first black heavyweight champion.
yes.
And
And
you
I
know,
think
they
that-
create the Mann Act was named, if I'm not mistaken, after a senator, and they created that law because they wanted desperately to put Jack Johnson in prison because they were offended and peed off about how he flaunted his white girlfriends. And so what they did was create that law, and the law states that it is illegal to transport prostitutes across state lines. So in the normal courses of his travel with his girlfriend, they charged him with transporting a prostitute. And that's how Jack Johnson went to prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so this charge, the modern day version of the Mann Act, is what we're looking at right now. It's almost inescapable to avoid that charge.
Yeah.
If it's if it's crafted correctly, and the federal government has charged Combs with essentially the modern day version of the Mann Act. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I don't, it's very difficult to see how he avoids that. But that said, you never know what is in the mind of a juror.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, it's going to be up to the jury to decide whether or not he's guilty of that.
Yeah.
Final thoughts from both of you.
I don't envy the jury at this point, because there's so many things. The testimony, just very confusing. You have an assistant saying, they transported drugs, not at the request of Sean Combs. You have the Cassie testimony. You have the video that they watched of the freak offs. There's so many things here that I don't know how they're going to sort through everything and come up with a good, just, fair conclusion and verdict. It's there's a lot.
Yohayra, final
Yeah.
word?
I agree with everything Nicole said. It's going to be interesting to see what the defense puts forward. And for me personally, I think that the transportation charge is the only one that I think that the elements will be met. And I think that one of the reasons is because it's the only one that doesn't require some sort of consent, or it doesn't have an aspect of control or coercion. It's either more of you did or you didn't. And here it's clear that he did. And, but the sentencing there is up to 10 years, again, up to 10 years. And there's 2 counts. They can be ranked concurrently. So if he was to really do some time, I think it would be on that charge. And again, it would be because of what you don't need to prove in order to be convicted.
Legal expert, legal eagle, Yohayra Azcona. My co-host, Nicole Johnson, thank you so much for all of that expert insight. Another week of this trial. We could be having the jury charged next week. And we'll be back next week to wrap up what happens in the courtroom. So that's going to do it for us for another episode of Dissecting Diddy. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Yohayra.
Thank you for having me.